If you're a general contractor, a subcontractor, or an owner, you want your jobs to be on time and on budget. And that means working with Autodesk Construction Cloud, software that lets your team design, plan, build, and operate from office to field. It means getting end-to-end solutions, seeing project data in real time, and preventing problems before they happen. Trusted on over 2 million construction jobs around the world. Build with Autodesk Construction Cloud. Try it free today at construction.autodesk.com.
10, 9, 8. Ignition sequence has started. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
You have entered Untold Radio AM. And now broadcasting from a secret location, your hosts, Joel Sturgis and Doug Hychek. And welcome to this edition of Untold Radio AM. I'm your host, Joel Sturgis. Right along with me is Mr. Doug Hychek. Doug, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Better,
yeah?
Better than yesterday.
You want to tell the audience what happened to you?
Well, no, we all came down with COVID, and yesterday was really the only really bad day, like really bad, like fever, severe headache, headache that was like off the charts.
Yeah, I've heard people.
You would cough, Joel, and you felt like your head was going to explode.
People have described it to me that have had COVID, my wife included, and now you, that the headache that's associated with it is like migraine level headache.
Oh, it's
like it is just absolutely relentlessly horrible to where you just want to go somewhere and hide because it hurts so damn bad.
Yeah, we just sleep off and on, have nightmares and sweat, and it's kind of fun. I just kept dosing with vitamin C, D, and zinc, and trying to drink a lot of water and just tough it out. And
starting to feel
normal again.
Yeah. Well, at least hopefully it's quick for you. Yeah. It's a quick recovery.
Yeah, so like yesterday, I was you're bored because you're in so much pain, but yet you're bored because you can't sleep because you're in too much pain. And your eyes hurt, so I'm like, okay, so I grab my iPad and I start looking at like YouTube videos because at least you can kind of go brain dead.
Yeah.
But I found I find this really cool video where a guy, and I recommend this to everybody. So this guy goes to a grocery store and he sees a lobster in the tank, with the rubber band on it.
Yeah.
And he's thinking, God, I wonder if I could make that into a pet. And I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be cool. Yeah, cool. Because, lobsters are kind of cool animals. They live 100 years. I mean, anything that's going to live 100 years can't be all dumb, right?
True.
Yeah, I mean, and you don't really know, like the one that he found in the grocery store could have been 50 years.
Who knows?
You don't know.
Who knows?
I don't know. I don't know that much. And so I started going down first I watched the video, then another one, a follow-up he did about 3 weeks ago. He named it Leon. And the name of the video, let me look here, it is called...
Leon the Rock Lobster?
No. It's called... Okay, it's called Turning a Grocery Store Lobster into a Pet. That's it. That's the name. It's not even
the bright side of that relationship is if it goes south, you could just have dinner.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
see, you picked up on that. And I think actually he picked up on it too. He said something like, if the zombie apocalypse happen, I always have an option.
He has his lobster.
Yeah, he's got his lobster. But anyhow, so he gets it home and he takes the rubber band off the claw, and the claw's like not functioning because it's been pinched under the rubber band. So he does like therapy on it.
Therapy on the lobster.
Oh yeah, and he starts like feeding it by hand. All these. He starts out with angleworms, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And then he goes to the same grocery store and he buys like other seafood trays, and he starts like dropping mussels and oysters and stuff in there. And and so you get to see a lot of behavior you would never see.
Sure.
This video. And you get to see how smart they are. And he ends up, he bought out like one of those claw things I think you use for taking fish hooks out.
Oh, yep.
And he uses that as like a play toy for so the lobster can like wrestle with the guy, get his exercise and have fun playing. And
so he's not only befriended him and made him a pet, but he's rehabbed him as well.
The guy's falling in love with this thing, right? He's thinking this is really cool. And so I just thought, this is really good. Well, anyhow, the guy, I wasn't the only one who thought that. The guy's already got, in 3 weeks, he's got 11 million hits.
Jeez, and all he did was turn a lobster into a pet.
He's basically a camera and aquarium, right?
Wow.
And a lobster from the grocery store.
That's insanity.
You got to remember, you get paid about $1,000 per 100,000 hits.
Yeah.
So do the math.
Oh, he's making the money on that. That lobster he bought from the grocery store is returning some really good dividends for him.
Oh yeah. Plus, he likes it, and I would imagine he'll keep doing. His second video has already got 5 million hits. So he's basically got 15 million or 16 million hits going on. And you couldn't do that, Joel, with a budget of $500,000.
Well, what's this world coming to?
Like a good Monster Quest episode that they started posting like 6 months ago, they have 1 million to 2 million views on them.
Yeah, you're being beat out by a lobster man.
Yeah.
So,
of course, you know me. I had to go down the lobster hole, not the rabbit hole, the lobster hole.
Did you reach out to him? Did you be like, hey?
No, but we should get him on as a guest. I think that'd be really cool. Maybe he's too rich to come on Untold. Anyhow, did you know that lobsters were once considered poor man's chicken, or just like crap?
I remember hearing that years ago when I was a kid in school, that lobster was for the poor. Mm-hmm. It wasn't really a delicacy until later on.
Right. And then a lot of people think the lobsters are red, and they're not. They're either blue, gold, brown. There's a funny story that actually happened to my dad. He was a sign painter, and he would paint murals and, whatever stores would ever want. And he got done with a mural. The store wanted a mural of an underwater scene. Mm-hmm. Over the seafood area. And so he did it, and the guy comes out and he goes, "That's all wrong." He said, "Why is the lobster brown?" Because it's at the bottom of the sea, right?
Yeah.
And he goes, "Well, that's what color they are." And he goes, "No, they're not. They're red." We had a big argument. My dad ended up just walking out of that job.
Yeah.
Anyhow, but
interesting.
They are not red. But what I really found, I have 100 facts here. Believe it or not.
100 facts about lobsters?
I do, right in front of me. Okay.
Oh, man.
So, they're all really cool. I don't know where to start. So lobster eggs are called roe, just like fish eggs, right? Mm-hmm. So prisoners often dined like kings, eating lobster, because that's what they would feed the prisoners, because it was so cheap.
Well, yeah. I suppose back in those days, lobster was the poor person's food.
Yep.
Like today's ramen noodles.
Exactly. So lobsters usually feed on the bottom, like on bottom dwellers like clams, snails, and crabs. They live in the murk and the mud in the bottom of the ocean, most cases. Lobsters can grow up to 40 pounds and 4 feet long.
Jeez.
Dude, that's a big lobster.
That's a big lobster, and they got claws that are pretty powerful.
And they live to be 100 years old.
And they live to be 100 years old. Who knew they lived to be a century old?
I don't know. It says lobsters are a great source of heart-healthy omega-3 fatty acids.
Yeah.
If you hold off from the butter, they're, actually pretty low cal. So a half ounce of lobster only has 96 calories and 2 grams of fat.
Well, so they're a healthy alternative.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, yep. See here, it says they have very poor eyesight, but a very highly developed sense of smell and taste.
That's cool.
Yep.
That is cool.
So I was, and then I went on, of course I'm watching YouTube, and I went on and I found this fascinating story. Do you remember that woman that got sucked out of an airplane? It's like 3 years ago.
Oh, yeah. Yep. I remember that.
A lot of people don't really know the details of that whole thing, and they didn't do a very good job in the newspapers.
Yeah.
Because I remember reading it too, and it was like so lean on facts, and there were obviously a lot of survivors, but they never even bothered to interview anybody.
Really?
No, on the plane.
Oh.
Like interview the other people. What did you see?
Yeah, they didn't flesh that out very well, though.
No, they didn't. So this happened back in April 17th, 2018. And there was a woman named Holly Mackey, and she sat down in an aisle seat. And at first she had sat down in the window seat. But then she realized maybe she had like a smaller bladder.
Yeah.
Was going to have problems and needed to get, she didn't want to bother people getting up going to the restroom. So she changed her seat to the aisle. Well, then some other ladies came and sat down next to her, and a woman who sat by the window's name was Jennifer.
Okay.
Ultimately the victim. So what happened? The left engine exploded. The cowling flew up, struck the plane, and broke the window. So suddenly there's hurricane force winds, right? Just
wow.
Just going through the airplane. And it's ice cold, like not hurricane force, but it's ice cold. So Holly looks over, and Jennifer is half out the window.
Damn.
And she reaches over the girl in the middle.
Yeah.
Grabs her, trying to hang on to this woman who's like 3/4 to half out the window, like her head and her upper body is the window.
Poor lady.
And there's obviously no way to get oxygen.
Yeah.
There's no way to breathe that ice cold air. I mean, it's, below zero. And apparently everybody on the plane was really calm. It's really surprising. Apparently everybody was just like in shock. What was, because, the whole plane filled up with cold air. And
well, sure, what they're witnessing too.
Everybody was really behaved, but so behaved, and the window was so loud, the wind coming in the window, that nobody could hear Holly's cries for help to help this woman.
Yeah.
Was hanging out the window. Nobody could hear her. Nobody even noticed. So you can imagine the scene playing out, right? And so all of a sudden, finally a stewardess comes and helps get Holly away, makes her let go of this Jennifer that's hanging out the plane.
Yeah.
And then she grabs 2 men that come into that aisle and grab her and get her back into the plane. These 2 heroic men, because they could have been sucked out too.
Yeah, right.
So they were super heroic. And so they get her in, and of course the stewardess starts CPR on her.
Yeah.
And they can't get any, she's basically dead from all the blunt force trauma.
Yeah.
But it's just odd that her life, she survived, the woman, Holly.
Yep.
Because she just wanted to pee.
Yeah.
Just a simple thing like that. Just every decision we make can affect whole life.
Exactly.
I find that interesting.
You just never know what decision, the little small decision.
Have you ever been on a plane where anything kind of weird went down?
No. Thank God. Turbulence.
I did
once or twice.
I did only, turbulence, but there was one time I was on a jet, and I've never seen this phenomena yet, but all this smoke filled the cabin. You could just see it coming in the ventilators, but it wasn't smoke, and I literally panicked. I didn't do anything, but my heart started racing, thinking, "Oh crap, this is not good." and it was coming in thick. And it was apparently some kind of phenomena that happens with some type of event inversion or something. And it turned the oxygen into, it vaporized it into this water moisture steam.
Dang.
It looked exactly like smoke. Have you ever seen that smoke where they take that piezo crystal and you put it in water and it makes this smoke just keep coming out of the water?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
It was like that kind of smoke. Yeah, it was like piezo crystal smoke. But it filled the whole plane up.
Damn.
And so
the stewardesses were probably like, don't worry about it.
I didn't see anybody else panicking. So I'm like,
happens from time to time.
Whatever. And then I was reading about one more weird plane story where a flight took off from Africa. And apparently it's quite common for people to smuggle animals and wildlife on these passenger planes, right? And all of a sudden the stewardess runs up front really fast. And then everybody's kind of like looking what's going on. And here comes this big crocodile up the aisle at everybody. And so everybody, and the plane was right in the moment of landing. It's like taxiing to land, right? And all of a sudden, since everybody ran to one end of the plane, the whole plane tipped nose forward and the plane crashed and killed everybody but one person.
That's nuts.
And if it wouldn't have been for that one person, no one would have known about the crocodile. Because they did find a crocodile at the crash site.
Damn. That's crazy. That's nuts.
Yeah, but weird things, what do you call it? Plane stories are
happenings. Yeah.
Yeah, they are. I mean, there's been so many mysteries.
That's scary.
Have you seen those photos with the big round dent in the nose cone of jetliner?
Yep, I have.
What the hell is that all about?
I've heard it's birds.
Yeah, but do you realize how big those nose cones are? They're
huge.
I mean,
but they must be made of some pretty flimsy material.
I don't believe it. Yeah, because I don't buy into the bird story. Every time I see those, there's been a number of them. I'm like, nah, that wasn't a bird.
No,
show me the blood. No. Show me the feathers.
Yeah, show me the evidence.
There's never, and they're always perfectly rounded.
Yeah. Come to think of it, you're right.
As if they hit an orb.
Yeah.
And
who knows?
Numerous, and that's the other thing too, because there's been numerous people who said, "Oh yeah, we saw an unidentified flying object out the window."
Yep.
Was that collision?
Yep. I've heard that too, where they've run into UFOs.
Yep.
Man, that's crazy stuff. Crazy stuff. Let me tell you. Oh, by the way, got a great guest tonight. We got Jeff Meldrum on tonight.
Yes.
Dr. Jeff Meldrum.
Legendary Jeff Meldrum.
Legendary. Yeah, author of Legend Meets Science.
Yep.
So it'd be a lot of fun to have him on. I think this is the first time we've had him on. So we had a lot of fun hanging out with him this last October.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of fun. So
yeah, we had a delightful dinner with Jeff, didn't we?
Yeah.
We really had a nice table of people there.
Yeah.
They were all,
yeah, it was a good time.
Yeah, they were fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. So the next one, of course, will be part 3. The third year coming up. I think is already in the works and planning. So that'll be good.
Is it going to happen if you talk to Abe?
I have not really sat down to talk to him about this yet, but I would imagine after the success of the second one, the third one, we'll have to see. Because I would imagine, though, he did pretty good. It was a pretty good turnout, so it would be really disappointing if there wasn't a third.
Well, I would think so. I think the event was good.
And the place that's held is nice, too. That Timberlake Lodge there in Grand Rapids. It's a pretty nice facility.
Yeah, that was nice. So we can just get away from the 1,000-degree hike for 9 miles would be good.
You mean the hike through downtown Belize? Yeah, that'd be nice.
Yeah.
Normally October for us is cool and crisp.
Exactly, and you could
fall setting in. You usually need a light jacket. Not that night.
No, I know, it was weird.
That night we were hiking through a tropical rainforest.
It was.
It was odd.
So
Odd.
I just reminded myself of a really weird story that I heard firsthand from a pilot. I swear to God, it just popped into my head, but it's a true story that actually happened to me.
Really?
Okay, so I used to go to this one flying camp up in Ontario, way up north, and this guy had this really cool camp he built. I mean, it was like luxurious. It was built in the middle of nowhere, like literally in the middle of nowhere. And they even had a runway, where they could land a wheeled airplane on this run.
Mm-hmm.
So you could actually take a King Air, go to the main airport and fly directly and land right at the lodge. You have to stop at like Thunder Bay and then you'd go there. But anyhow, so I said to the guy, I said, Dick, I said, have you've been a pilot for a long time. And I said, anything weird ever happened to you, while you're flying? Any good stories? And we were just sitting around, having a beer. He goes, yeah, I've got one that I still don't believe actually happened. And I said, what do you mean you don't believe? He said, it's so weird. There's no way it could have happened, but it did. So he was flying in Ontario, and he had engine trouble. And so he's, of course, you look for a place you can land an open area. And he sees a field, and he does an emergency landing in this guy's field, and there's a farmhouse. Everything's good so far. He gets out. He walks up to the farmhouse. He tells them what happened. He had to land in their field. And can he use their phone? And, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. And he said, yeah, we're about to have dinner. Why don't you join us for dinner? And so they're in there having dinner and blah, 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 and talking away. And he said, yeah, my wife will be here shortly. And, so finally she comes in a little bit late for dinner. She comes in. And the husband introduces Dick and explains that he had this emergency landing and in the field. And, just kind of what happened. And
the normal stuff,
she turns white. Just white. Like beyond white.
Wow.
And she walks into the other room where she had set a bag down. She had come in the house, walked into the bedroom, set a bag down. Goes into the bag and hands her husband this book. And the book is about a man named Dick who landed in their field, who had engine trouble, and landed in their field.
What?
It was a children's book. And the guy in the book looked like Dick.
Man. That is really weird. That's very, very strange.
What are the chances of that?
Right?
Jillian, it couldn't happen.
No, that is crazy. So he sees the book, he hears all about it. He's Dick the pilot from the children's book and landed there. Wow, that's strange.
And she bought that book that day in town.
That is odd.
Even the same name. I mean, you could see the chances of having all that happen would be already 1,000,000,000 to 1.
Yeah,
but
right.
The guy's name is the same.
Yeah, that is really high strangeness.
I just heard from Jeff, and he is in our little green room.
Oh, perfect.
Just so you know.
Perfect. Have Jeff come on. It'll be a lot of fun. I mean, yeah, he people love Jeff, though.
You know what kills me about Jeff is he's fun to hang out with. I mean, he's a professor, right, of anatomy and anthropology, but he's actually fun to hang out with.
He is. Yeah, he is. You're a lot of fun. He's just a normal dude. I thought he was very personable. So, and if you ever get a chance to meet Jeff, he is really, really a nice individual.
And do you remember his talks? Actually, he did 2 of them.
Yeah, he did 2 of them.
Yeah, it's just amazing.
Yeah, it was great stuff.
Well, we'll try to boil down some of his knowledge tonight so we can, just hopefully convince a few more skeptics tonight.
Well, you've known Jeff for years.
21, I think. 20.
And so you probably met him on several occasions.
Yes, yeah. And I've taken some, obviously I went to Snell Grove with Jeff too, and I've went and I did a Swaddle River out in Washington expedition with him and John Mayenzinski.
Oh, I bet you that was fun.
That was, featured in a History Channel show, Giganto the Real King Kong.
Yep.
Yeah, that was great. That was fun. And I remember we were filming all day long, and you get tired, and it was like 10 o'clock. And Jeff surprised everybody with like homemade blueberry cobbler that he made in a...
What? Get out of here. That would have been awesome.
And he had fresh coffee for everybody, and he doesn't even drink coffee.
What?
I thought, what a sweetie.
Man, that's the guy you want to go expeditions with right there.
Yeah.
Fresh blueberry cobbler and hot coffee. Come on. Doesn't get any better than that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was delicious. So I still remember, those... because when you're starving and it's kind of late.
And there's fresh cobbler afoot. Yeah.
Yeah, made in a Dutch oven, with a real...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, on an open fire.
Yep.
Yep. That's the only way to camp right there, my friend.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Nothing really happened significant on that expedition.
I mean, you did get cobbler, so, I mean, that's pretty significant.
But, so often these things are just, they're fun, but sometimes, not every time something happens.
Oh, since last week, I have had an Oreo. I haven't had an Oreo cookie in forever.
Oh, you either?
Yep, and my wife bought a package of Oreos, golden whatever Oreos, the more vanilla ones.
Golden Oreos are not real Oreos. Dude.
Well, that's the kind she had.
Well,
all right.
Not real.
They weren't bad. They weren't bad. They're just as good as I remember. But starting eating that center, I'm thinking, this is just sugar and lard. That's all it is.
Did you tell her to buy you a pack?
No. Nope. She bought them on her own.
I actually got a number of letters about that segment. It was interesting. People were really into it.
They're into the Oreo speech.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
Well, whatever. Now we went into lobsters, whatever.
Yeah, lobsters, Oreos, we do broadcast kind of live at the dinner hour. So, might as well have some type of food discussion.
It's appetizing.
May as well. And now, so you have the COVID, like you'd mentioned earlier.
Yes.
Now, I want to mention this. My wife had it. Speaking of food, it took her forever, and this is good that you haven't lost your sense of taste.
No.
She completely lost. My son still doesn't have his taste back.
Yeah, Yvette did. She's not too. So, she said everything tastes really off.
Well, yeah, to him, my son, he says everything tastes like what he's eating. He said everything just tastes like water. Yeah. There's no flavor.
But hopefully I'll survive.
Oh, you will.
Like an
You'll
old
be
goat.
Just fine.
Well, maybe part of my horn will break off, but that's about
that's about it. You'll be just fine.
I hope so. Yeah.
You'll make her through just fine. Only the good die young anyway.
Actually, the saying that nobody really takes serious anymore, and there's truth to it. Whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
That is true. You're not wrong there.
And
there is a lot of truth in that statement.
And that's kind of gone away nowadays. It's like run and hide.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. Yeah. Things are, not to get on a soapbox about, but things are definitely softer these days than they were when we were growing up. I remember my mother took me to a chicken pox party and made me hug the kid with the chicken pox.
I actually remember that too. I was like 7 or 8 years old. Yeah.
Yep.
Chicken pox.
Yep. That kid don't look right. Go up there, give a big hug. It's your buddy. It's your friend. I think it was my cousin's house. Go ahead. Give your cousin a hug. Yeah, she don't look right.
It was the idea was to get her when you were young and versus.
Yep. That was the idea. That was the idea. So, I had the chicken pox. Everybody I knew had the chicken pox because we all went to these parties where they were giving each other the chicken pox. So, yeah, you don't see that anymore. Those days are gone.
And trust me, COVID ain't fun. I mean, it was a really rough 2-3 days.
Yeah.
But so is the flu, and so is a lot of these things.
Oh, yeah.
They're all horrible, and we can't run away from everything. We can't give up our quality of life.
Right, exactly.
I mean, this is going to be the last one, Joel.
Yeah.
Guess what? We're hiring at Culver's. That means if you're up for welcoming families with coworkers who feel like family, and you have a thing for fresh frozen custard, and for growing your career in a place you can be proud of, with a schedule that makes you smile, like, say, cheese curds smile, you're our kind of people. So join the Culver's team. Learn how you can build so much more than butter burgers. Apply at culvers.jobs.
Hi, welcome to Culver's.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, we got to run a break. When we come back, we're going to have Dr. Jeff Meldrum joining us. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Right after this.
Hi, Tom Bodette. If you can hear me, then you have an internet connection, which means you can do cool things online, like listen to streaming radio, obviously, or watch a video of a monkey washing a cat. Let your freak flag fly. Or you can book a room at a great price at motel6.com. Isn't the internet wonderful? Everything you want right at your fingertips, and whoa, did not need to see that. I'm Tom Bodette for Motel 6, and we'll leave the light on for you.
Unexpected reactions to smart financial decisions brought to you by feedthepig.org.
Well, I finally did it. My student loan is totally paid off.
I can't believe it.
I can't believe it either. I paid more than the minimum each month, and soon enough, it was gone.
So you're just giving up?
Giving up on what?
The life of luxury. Egyptian cotton, caviar Thursdays, designer everything.
What are you talking about?
Our plan. What happened to winning the lottery and mastering the art of the perfect mimosa? Hosting galas, wearing enough jewelry to require a bodyguard, vacationing in the French Riviera, and then buying it.
I just thought maybe it was time to prepare for my future. You know, set some financial goals, make some smart investments, open a 401k.
Financial goals? Investments? A 401k? You are horrifying right now. Listen, if winning the lottery were easy, everyone would do it.
When it comes to financial stability, don't get left behind. Get tools and tips for saving at feedthepig.org. This message brought to you by the American Institute of CPAs and the Ad Council.
Northern Tool and Equipment.
So me and the boys head out to tailgate today and find some other fans in our spot.
Well, it happens.
Cheering for the wrong team.
Oh, this is war.
Even worse, they've got this couch set up and everything.
A couch?
Yeah, it's sectional.
All right, first thing, don't ever use the word sectional again.
Done.
Second, I want you to grab a 4,700-pound tow chain with J-hook and grab hammer. Throw that on the back of your truck.
Got it.
Now you're going to Hail Mary the J-hook over the end of that couch. Time to find a better spot for your new friends.
That should do it.
There's no problem a little horsepower can't solve. Northern Tool and Equipment.
Taking a family of 5 to the amusement park can cost a small fortune.
Oh, yeah. So to save some money, we thought, hey, let's bring the amusement park to us. Yeah. Go ahead.
All right. Step right up, young man. Are you ready to ride the wacky waterfall?
That's just the bathtub with the shower head running.
Nope, it's the wacky waterfall.
It's the shower, Dad.
Waterfall.
Wacky.
There's an easier way to save. To get a free rate quote, go to geico.com. Then buy online, over the phone, or at your local Geico office.
Green light. Hey, girl. School zone. I'm getting hungry. Car changing lanes. You want to meet me for pizza? Stop sign. Intersection clear. Yeah, street. Pizza sounds good. Ballin Street? Girlin Street!
It's hard to concentrate on two things at once, like texting and driving. Stop the text, stop the wrecks. How will you stop texting and driving? Tell us at stoptextstopwrecks.org. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
And welcome back to Untold Radio AM. I'm your host, Joel Sturgis. Right along with me is Mr. Doug Hychek. Doug, how you doing over there?
I'm still doing good. Still hanging out.
Yeah.
Feel much better than I did yesterday.
You made her back across the break, so that's great. That's awesome. I'm glad because, you know, it would literally be dead air.
I beg your pardon.
Joke. Bad joke. Oh, tonight we got a great guest on tap. We have Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum with us tonight. And we got the opportunity, I did, you already knew Jeff, but I got to meet Jeff face to face. It was in October during our Minnesota Bigfoot research team, our when we put on our event. Words coming hard today, evidently. Wow. When we were doing our symposium on all things Bigfoot, and it was a great time, by the way. Man, it was such a great time. And Jeff, you were one of the keynote speakers there, and boy, did you blow everyone's doors off. It was so much fun. So if you've never had a chance to see Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum live and do his speeches, you really owe it to yourself to get to one of these events and sit in. And when we're able to. Times are uncertain right now again, but hopefully within short order things will normalize again and we'll be able to have events and do this and do that again. But without any further ado, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Jeff here. Jeff is the real deal. He is a professor of anatomy and anthropology in the Department of Biological Sciences at Idaho State University. Meldrum is also he's a professor in the Department of Physical and Occupational Therapy and the Department of Anthropology. I already said that. Meldrum is an expert on foot morphology. Now that is going to be cool, and locomotion in primates. That's going to be the key when we talk tonight, amongst other things. But keep in mind, Jeff is the foremost authority when it comes to Bigfoot tracks and Bigfoot feet, not to be too redundant here. He is the man to turn to get these answers. Without any further ado, Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum, welcome to Untold Radio AM.
Well, thanks. It's a pleasure to join you tonight.
Yeah, how you holding up? I mean, it's we're past Christmas. Your Christmas is good, I'm trusting, and all that kind of good stuff. And the new year is upon us, and wonderful things are coming.
Pleasure to spend Christmas in Hawaii. So it was a nice...
life is truly hard, Jeff. It's truly hard.
Yeah. It was pretty rainy, but still it was warm temperatures and tropical environments. It was really pleasant.
Oh, sure.
We're back in the saddle and going full bore with the onset of the semester, and students are eager and anxious given the circumstances, and professors are anxious and spinning more plates, juggling more balls, it seems, every time we tackle these COVID circumstances.
So when you're in school, and of course you're the professor, and they all know your Bigfoot background, right? Your students, did they ever come up to you and talk on it, or?
Oh, they do. I don't think it's universal. I mean, I don't unless I'm wearing a Bigfoot T-shirt, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose.
That kind of gives it away. But word gets around. It does, and they do ask questions, and sometimes, when they come up to my office for office hours to visit, they, sometimes will be forward enough, not forward, but outgoing enough to say, hey, can I see some of the casts, or can I see your lab? And so, the word does get around, and the classes, some classes when I teach, some anthro classes like Survey of Living Primates, I'll inject a lecture on relatives, possibility of other subhuman, non-human relic species, and the students enjoy it. In fact, sometimes they bring their significant others or family members to partake as well. So it's known.
Yeah, that's cool though. Yeah. That is super cool though. I mean, you bring that education to them through a channel that is kind of unorthodox in that manner. Oh, and I mean, it becomes a really great way of teaching at the same time of holding that interest.
Absolutely. It's a great hook. I fielded some criticism from some objection when I offered an experimental course entitled The Relic Hominoid Inquiry. And, I had, since it was a irregular course, not on the books, I had to do some publicizing it with posters and so forth in the department and other places on campus. And some of the naysayers were tearing down the posters as fast as I could put them up.
Oh.
And it was quite discouraging. But it was, my department chair, I had discussed my plans for this course, this special offering, topical, and had developed a very replete outcomes and objectives list and syllabus, and went over that with him. So he was familiar with what I intended, and it had all the science. As Matt Damon, we scienced the shit out of it, and had paleontology and ecology and biogeography and physical anthropology and taxonomy and all these different aspects of it, as well as the folklore and the ethnographic angles. And so when a couple of faculty members accosted him in his office, he simply reached in his drawer, pulled out the copy of the syllabus I had given him, and handed it to him and said, "Get out of here." So he had my back. That was nice, but still, there was so much peer pressure, and this is the unfortunate, sad commentary on the whole situation. There was so much peer pressure, negative peer pressure, coming from other faculty members. That the enrollment, I hear, because I had so many requests to do something like this sometime, I expected it to be a gate buster. And instead, there were barely, I think, 12 students ended up, and none of them were biology or anthropology students. They were all other majors that just had an interest in this subject. But it was rumored that that one particular curmudgeon was encouraging students to enroll for the class, heckle me for the first week, and then drop it before the deadline rolled around. So I don't know if that's true or not, but that was the word on the street that and the fact that, like I said, my posters were being pulled down and the chairman was accosted, enrollment was dismal. It's a sad commentary, because it's such a great hook, and more, especially here with now that teachers have gotten comfortable and familiar with the potential of Zoom. I've done so much educational outreach to college classes, high school classes, grade school classes, from critical thinking to environmental science to ecology and anthropology departments on this topic. And, the students love it. The students love the engagement, and bringing the science to bear on the question.
Is it easier now? I mean, this was this a long time ago this happened to you? I mean, this is the early days you must be talking about.
No. This was fairly recent. I mean, it's not
really.
The one about the experimental course, because I actually did the course to help get myself organized to undertake the writing of the next book, which cast the net more broadly and looked at relic hominoids generally. So it was Sasquatch and Other Wild Men: The Search for Relic Hominoids was the working title. And I thought to myself, this would be a great way to get that book organized, because each lecture that I had to write to teach the course would be the skeleton of a chapter. Would be the outline of a chapter.
I would have thought it would have been easier, because shows like Finding Bigfoot, Monster Quest, stuff like that are out in pop culture, right? It's very accepted, and I would have thought for sure that the university would have been embracing that as an opportunity for enrollment and then engagement.
There are different levels. I mean, there is no such thing as the university.
Okay.
You have administrators, you have middle administrators, deans, and so forth. You have faculty, you have your own department colleagues and staff and so forth. And of course, you have the students, you have a body of graduate students, you have a population of undergraduates and professional students. So, and each one of them has different backgrounds, different goals, different perspectives. And like I said, it really was peer pressure. And I mean, this is why, unfortunately, again, sad commentary, I will not recruit graduate students to this department because of the very negative treatment my former graduate students received at the hands of both fellow graduate students and other faculty. Just a few, not all, not universal. I mean, there's always, it just takes one bad apple. But
sure.
The department was quite polarized as far as attitude and opinion about my activities along these lines, and so the very negative individuals were very vocal and had a lot of influence on students, harassing my students at the copy machine, things like that. It's just not that they were doing anything related to Bigfoot. It was simply because of their association with me. And by pure association, they were the object of harassment. And that's documented, unfortunately. I mean, that became, anyway, I hate to dwell on the negative because on the flip side, there have been so many positives, so much expression of support, so much curiosity and interest from both students and other faculty, especially our younger faculty. I mean, most of the really negative elements of our department and across campus have gone away. They're either retired or gone on to other assignments. I'm finding
we're gathered here today to join Mike and Jill in holy matrimony.
So they may file jointly this tax season.
And you are?
April from TaxAct, the tax filing software with the expert guidance to help you file for less and get more.
Works for me. So, Mike, do you take this woman to love, honor, and get her a maximum refund?
I do.
Jill?
Ditto.
I now pronounce you married, filing jointly.
I always cry at filing status updates.
TaxAct.
Switch to TaxAct today and start for free.
See taxact.com for details.
Noom Weight uses psychology to help people everywhere learn about their eating habits.
Eating is my love language?
Yep, sure is.
I say yes to seconds out of guilt.
It's hard to say no to Aunt Jenny's banana pudding.
Wait, I do what?
Oh, fog eating happens to everybody.
What the
We know. It can be a lot to take in, but with the help of Noom Weight, you'll learn the psychology behind your eating habits, how to change them, and get closer to reaching your weight loss goals. Sign up at Noom.com.
The younger faculty in our department, they don't harbor that same kind of bad behavior and vitriol, if you will. I mean, that's no real way to describe it. And so a lot of expressions of interest and support. So it is different. I mean, this experience with this experimental course took place about 5 or 6 years ago. And it's even improved lately, much more so. I mean, for example, we had a visiting assistant professor in anthropology who had recently received her PhD and was doing now some postdoctoral work before landing a real tenure track position. But she was very interested in our anatomical suite and so forth because of her research in forensic archaeology. But so she came over to introduce herself, and I gave her a tour of the anatomical suite. We discussed, the access to tissues for her experimental research and so forth and so forth. And then as we got past all that, there was a slight lull. And then she said, "Can I ask a geeky question?" And I said, "Well, sure. Those are often the best ones." She said she reaches in her handbag and pulls out a copy of Sasquatch Legend Meets Science. "Would you sign my book?" It turns out not only was she fascinated by this subject, but her father was a real enthusiast as well. So not only did she sign her book, but I autographed the field guide and the headshot for her to give to her father, which she was delighted with. But the point being, this is not me just, "Oh yeah, Jeff, you're a great guy." Yeah. This was not me just patting myself on the shoulder. It was, for me, the gratification was, here was a brand new PhD from a mainstream, well-reputationed, prominent program, and still she had this passion for this topic, this subject matter, and she's not been the only one. I've met others as well, So it's going to be about 5 years before they have tenure and can really pursue with the job security they need to have to undertake more controversial subject matter. Hopefully, even in 5 years, the controversy will be even less anyway. But by the time, she reaches tenure and others of this new generation, there will be quite a turnover through retirements and attrition in department chairs, journal editors, society presidents, the gatekeepers of academia, who still labor under the shadow of old, now defunct paradigms. But as Thomas Kuhn said in his book, Scientific Revolution, sometimes it takes an entire generation to pass away before new ideas can really take root and blossom. So I think we're
Makes
right
sense.
on the cusp. We're really right on the cusp.
Sure. Makes a lot of sense. Go ahead, Doug.
Jeff, why do you think there's two distinct camps? There seems to be, a good percentage of people that are totally open-minded, that North America is being, North America has these unknown hominids in it, and other people are like, there's no way.
Right.
And I mean,
yeah.
Are you different, Jeff? Why are you an open-minded professor? And you just seem to, I would imagine you're a believer at this point, based on all the scientific evidence. But what makes you different and what makes them different? Have you ever wondered that?
Oh, yes. Oh, of course I've wondered why there was such a strong and visceral rejection from the scientific community. And the more I thought about it, I think the answer is, at least the answer is, during that early period of the 60s and into the 70s, there was, because see, as I started my graduate work, the influence of the prevailing notions that dominated human evolution, theories of human evolution in anthropology, still were carrying some influence forward, namely what was called the single species hypothesis. It was this notion that was gaining traction back in the 60s, primarily from, one of the places where it was promoted and advocated strongly was the faculty at the University of Michigan. Milford Wolkoff was one of the most one of the strongest advocates and longest persisting advocates of this notion, that a notion borrowed from ecology, which in turn had borrowed it from microbiology, based on the competitive exclusion principle, which simply was, people are probably familiar, heard the adage, no two species can occupy the same niche. They'll always be, one will always outcompete the other. And so they'll either be niche partitioning, sub-specializations within that niche, or character displacement. The bill size of closely related birds has evolved so that they don't compete so directly, but they can, their differential bill size allows them to exploit different seeds, say, or different insects. Okay. So anyway, a young anthropology discipline was grabbing, they were trying to glean the best of every other science. And so from ecology, they got this niche hypothesis, this niche theory that was built upon that principle of competitive exclusion. And this is where you hear the phrase, no two species can occupy the same niche. Well, anthropology thought, hominins, human ancestors, that's, bipedalism, braininess, and culture, especially culture, that's a pretty distinctive niche. So it would seem that there could be only one species occupying it at any given time. And so evolution, it was kind of forced into this mold, this preconception that there could be only one species, which would give rise subsequently to another. There would be gradual change, and we could recognize another species, but it was always just one. There never were multiple species coexisting. Well, by the mid-70s, the fossil record began to really explode. And, even in the early 70s, the robust and gracile Australopithecines in South Africa were really challenging this notion. The single species hypothesis advocates were saying, well, what the variation we see is no different than the variation you would see between a male and a female gorilla. One's more robust and bigger than the other one. Well, pretty soon it became clear that there were different types. There were robust Australopithecines and gracile Australopithecines. Well, okay. It was then acknowledged that these are basically bipedal chimps. So, they don't really have culture. They don't have brains much bigger than a chimp. So our single species, our competitive exclusion doesn't apply to them. Well, no sooner had they said this than Richard Leakey is publishing his discoveries in East Africa, and he's got fossils of Homo habilis, Homo rudolfensis, Homo erectus, and a robust form, Paranthropus boisei, all living side by side at the exact same time. Just blew the single species hypothesis out of the water. And now, of course, we wonder, how could we ever have thought that? Because there are dozens of species occupying not a single lodgepole pine tree trunk, but a bushy bush by any standard. So that at any time, if you took a slice through a time segment, let's just say you went back 30,000 years, there were a half a dozen different species scattered across Asia and Africa that you might bump into. Species of hominin, of upright, bigger-brained, bipedal, culture-bearing hominins. And so...
Jeff, when you say hominins, you mean humans, a form of a human, correct?
Well, but not Homo sapiens, a form of a species on the lineages that emerged since the split with a last common shared ancestor with other great apes,
right?
Chimpanzees. So Australopithecines, possibly Ardipithecus. I would not be a strong supporter of that position, but Australopithecines, and then we have the emergence of Homo habilis, Homo rudolfensis, Homo ergaster, Homo erectus. When that genus emerged, then there was, even within Homo, a tremendous amount of diversification, and we had persistent Australopithecines. I mean, for all intents and purposes, the Hobbit, Homo floresiensis, is a late form of Australopithecine, or early Homo habilis, maybe. I mean, you're really splitting hairs when you try to draw a difference between Homo habilis and Australopithecus africanus. It's the real difference is when Homo ergaster, or the African form of what people might know as Homo erectus, emerged. You had a huge increase in body size and reduction in sexual dimorphism, massive expansion of the brain, and material culture with stone tools and big game hunting and fire control and home bases and so forth and so forth. I mean, it was a real dramatic shift there. But prior to that, they were just kind of subtle differences of degree rather than of kind. So yes, that's what we're talking about hominins. So
have you come to a guess as to which one of these Bigfoot might be related to? Just a guess?
A conjecture, a hypothesis, an educated guess would be one of two. And I hate one of the things that always irritates me is when people tell me what I think, and this notion out there that I'm just convinced that they are just apes. First of all, the just part is really silly and simply reflects the ignorance of the person saying it. They don't know how distinct and marvelous apes are by comparison to other mammals. And yet they are just other mammals. And that's in the sense that, again, we're talking about differences of degree, not differences of kind. There's not this gaping chasm that separates us from them or them from other animals. Anyway, so two working hypotheses that a null hypothesis, which in science we try to falsify a hypothesis, we try to knock the legs out, but so our starting point is we suggest, okay, what if it's this? And now let's examine this and look at it. So one of them is the original suggestion of Gigantopithecus.
Right.
You've got something that's the right size in the right place at the right time. Those are pretty persuasive arguments. I mean, the fact that we've got a giant ape, or a giant, let me put it this way, a giant hominoid, which includes us and the apes.
Yeah.
So just to keep the net broadly, in East Africa, that we know persisted until probably as late as 200,000 years ago, in a place where Sasquatch-like creatures are also sighted, and their footprints, which are indistinguishable from Sasquatch footprints, are observed and have been documented. That's pretty telling that we should consider that possibility. However, our fossil record of Gigantopithecus is scant, and questions remain as to how big its brain was, how if it was bipedal.
Yeah,
I mean, that big and that heavy, you're on the ground. There is no clambering around in the trees. So if you're restricted to the ground, you have two options to get around. You either walk on two legs or you walk on four. So at the very least, there's a 50-50 chance, if you just take it on that superficial level. But then if you understand the differences, if you understand why chimps and gorillas and orangs don't walk on all fours the same way that your dog or cat does, because of the evolution of their upper extremities and shoulder girdles and chest shape and so forth, in such a way that when they come to the ground, their joints are not designed for palmagrade quadrupedal walking. How many of your listeners out there, when you go to do push-ups, find that it causes sharp pain in your wrist?
Sure.
And so they sell devices that you can, those rings that you can grip to do push-ups off the floor. Or I just, when I do push-ups, not as much as I used to, but I just fold my knuckles under like a gorilla and do my push-ups from the backs of my knuckles, for the very reason that gorillas walk on the backs of their knuckles, to spare the shoulders and the wrist and the elbow those shearing forces that move out. So the point being, a gorilla-shaped Gigantopithecus on the ground would have a much greater tendency to have its torso upright than it would be to rest on all fours.
Or at least upright at times.
Right.
It might have been 50-50.
Depending on the vegetation, depending on the topography. I mean, when we're out in very steep terrain, we commonly adopt a clambering posture on all fours as we support ourselves with our hands and climbing up a steep slope.
Well, the other thing too, we talk about apes and humans. I just watched a video where an orangutan was driving all over with a golf cart doing pickups, picking up stuff.
I saw that today. That was crazy.
Yeah. It's just insane. You're like, okay.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's the thing is these, if you've ever had the opportunity to spend some time just observing, let alone interacting with great apes, and I have had the privilege in laboratory settings to work with some apes, and also was afforded the opportunity to go in on a weekly basis, and for like 2 hours during the afternoon, just sit there and watch them and take notes and snap pictures of their postures and their mannerisms and how they move, and all those sort. And I've done footprint studies where we. I mean, just to show you how funny, get off the subject a little, but I built this really nice little sandbox, just a framed area with visqueen lining it, and then clean playground sand in it. And then the objective was the trainer, that these chimps were big enough that, but still young enough that they could interact with a human trainer directly, but they couldn't be trusted to be around other guests or visitors. Plus, there were health issues. I mean, I had to produce a TB certificate that showed that I had was clean and so forth, but to even be in the room. But in any case, the handler would bring the chimp in, and as it was filmed, she would coax it with a food reward and get it to walk bipedally down the sand. Well, once he figured out what this new object was and wasn't anxious about it, he did it with no problem. And then she would take him over to a holding cage while I came in and took measurements and photographs. And then I took this little, I just, had purchased there, in a little rake to smooth out the sand again. And then we would bring him out again and repeat the process. Well, he had done this 2 or 3 times, and he was frankly getting tired of going into the holding pen, even though he got all kinds of goodies, Kool-Aid squirted in his mouth and Cheerios and tricks. It was a rewarded indentured servitude, but he was having fun. So this time he walked the length of the track bed, and he turns around and she signals for him to go into the holding pen, and he looks at her. He looks over at me standing in the wings waiting for my turn to come in, and then he walks over to the sandbox, and with his fingers like a rake, he smooths out his footprints and completely erased them. Say, okay, we're ready to go again. We don't have to go into that cage. I just stood there laughing, and so the next pass we had to herd him away from it right away so he didn't disrupt my data. But wow. It's amazing the interaction. And we shouldn't, being a dog owner, we shouldn't diminish the remarkable intelligence and behaviors of other animals. I mean, I think we have a long history in animal behavior, and in biology. The field of animal behavior has helped kind of pull back the curtain on this, I think. But in biology, we've long underestimated the intelligence and the sentience of non-human animal life, and that's where it gets. People, if they had never seen a chimpanzee, and they saw a chimpanzee for the first time in their interactions, well, I mean, you just look at the caricaturizations of chimps and gorillas and orangs by early biological illustrators and the descriptions. Sure. I mean, they thought they were hairy people. They thought they were some wild, primitive people. And they depicted them with very anthropomorphic qualities so it doesn't surprise me when a novice eyewitness sees a Bigfoot that in their mind, that thing has got to be human. It looked so human, I mean, my humanity is not determined by the shape of my nose or whether my toe sticks out to the side or not. There's a lot more that goes into the formula than those 2 anatomical characteristics, and yet people think that, it can't be an ape. It doesn't have a thumb-like big toe, or it has a hooded nose. I mean, that's the most that's the most misguided thinking that you can have.
Jumping to those conclusions is what it's
What
doing.
did you learn about the chimp tracks? I mean, were they in a type straight line, or were they?
Well, there's a tremendous amount of idiosyncrasy. We actually had the chance to look at a couple of chimps, and one of them walked consistently with the big toe in line with the lateral digits, the remaining digits, and the other one walked with the big toe sticking out almost at right angles to the remaining digits to the side of the foot. And they both tended to walk with the big toe pointing in the direction of travel. So one had a very toed out posture of the foot, so the remaining digits were almost pointing out to the sides, whereas the other, all the toes tended to point straight ahead. So there's idiosyncrasy. I've seen the same kind of thing with gorillas. When I collected gorilla footprints in the snow in Salt Lake one year, there was a female who walked around. She didn't like the snow anyway. She didn't like to feel the snow on her feet. She walked with her big toes lined up with the other digits, like this one chimp. And the casts I have of her feet look very different as a result than those of the big male silverback, who strutted around with this stiff-legged stride with his big toes sticking out to the side, but also, like the chimp, tending to direct the big toe forward in the direction of travel. So what I was looking for specifically was evidence in the chimpanzee footprint of a mid-tarsal pressure. Would coincide with the mid-tarsal break. And what we found is, especially in that individual where the toes stuck off to the side, the transmission of pressure, even though they exhibited a mid-tarsal break, you could see the flexion in the midfoot as the heel came up. And this has been documented quite thoroughly on studies where they walk on force plates or on glass plates so they can photograph the foot viewed from below using a mirror. But in the sand, the pressure experienced through the substrate was, I mean, it was not equivalent to the Sasquatch foot or a human flat, flexible human foot. There was a pressure ridge, but it tended to be behind the metatarsal heads, in more similar to the human foot with its arch, but for a different reason. Right. So it was enlightening. It was interesting.
Well, can you explain to the audience, Jeff, about the tightrope walk that we so often find with a Bigfoot trackway?
Well, I keep hearing that we so often find that, and I honestly don't have at my fingertips many examples that actually illustrate that. I think quite honestly, I think it's a little bit overstated. I think, yes, there is a tendency for a very shallow straddle, very little width or a gait straddle between right and left foot rows, but I don't get the sense of the tightrope walk to the degree that some people place emphasis on that. I mean, the tracks that I examined, for example, at 5 Points outside of Walla Walla, it was walking at a fairly slow pace initially. And I must admit that now, in 2020 hindsight, I was so taken aback by that experience, and that being the first opportunity to really examine footprints in the field. I didn't do as thorough a job of documenting the parameters of gait as I would if I had that same opportunity now. But when it was walking more slowly, there was a reasonable amount of space between the right and left feet, a straddle. And of course, there was also evidence of it literally looking over its right shoulder, I think, to observe an approaching vehicle coming down in the wee hours of the night or early morning, AM hours. I mean, someone, I think, up driving those roads on the weekend, the first weekend that the snow had melted away sufficiently to allow you to get up onto those ridgeline roads by that route. But as it looked over its right shoulder, its right foot angled out 45 degrees. And at about every second step, the right foot was angled out. So as it was walking along, it was looking over its shoulder, monitoring the progress of these headlights, I think. That's my explanation. But then it took off running. I think the lights got too close, and it decided it needed to get to cover, and it took off running. And the full-length, more casual tracks with those angled out as it looked over its shoulder, the step doubled in length, and we had a series of either half tracks with just the fore part of the foot touching down, or much greater contact with the forefoot. So there were full-length tracks where the heel impressed maybe half the depth of the forefoot. Most of the weight was coming down on the forefoot.
Weren't those tracks, Jeff, in kind of a slippery mud?
There were places where, they were in a very wet mud, but it was a horizontal road for the most part with a slight incline, and that's where the slippage occurred. There were examples of slippage where the toes very forcefully flexed and dug in to gain purchase as it slid, 2 or 3 inches back. And it was, but otherwise, once it got onto the soft, fallow field, the tilled fallow stubble field than the footprints, the full-length footprints impressed, and the forefoot impressed quite deeply, though, by comparison. And then the trackway was lost as it darted into the cover alongside the irrigation canal, the only cover that was available right there.
What are your thoughts on some of the early John Green photos of trackways near Bluff Creek? You remember all the famous photos on the dirt road or the side of a road?
Right. And there was one of those in particular that was published in his On the Track of the Sasquatch that is often cited as illustrating the tightrope. But if you look, it's just a bit of an optical illusion, because the trackway is actually following the turn in the road. And so I think that, each foot, as it's navigating that turn, is being placed more directly in front of the other by default. Excuse me. I don't mean to dismiss out of hand this tendency, because what I was going to say is, even as we speed up and transition from a casual walk to a brisk walk to a run, you will find that the straddle diminishes, because it's more imperative that single support limb, where only one foot, if any foot, is in contact with the ground, be placed directly under the center of gravity. And so that's obviously the challenge of a tightrope walk, is to keep your center of gravity over the tightrope. And so each foot is placed where it will lend support on the tightrope. That's why the tightrope walker has this big, long beam that he carries, the pole, because that allows him or her to very quickly shift the mass of the pole and thereby adjust their effective center of mass over the tightrope, over the support.
Okay.
We do the same thing. If we don't have a pole, what do we do? We throw our arms out.
Yeah.
And what about the PGF tracks? Were they kind of in a line, or were they?
We have such a poor documentation. We've got the attempts by, I think, who was it? Not Leclerc. Leclerc?
Understanding your immune system and the complex work happening inside you every day will forever change the way you think about your body. This is the epic story of Immune, a journey into the mysterious system that keeps you alive, a new book by Philipp Detmer, founder of the popular YouTube channel Kurzgesagt. Filled with illustrations and information you didn't get in science class, Immune is available wherever books and audiobooks are sold.
That tried to stitch together frames from the film in order to make a trackway, but there's a lot of distortion and whether it's parallax or I don't know how to describe it, but it's the same kind of distortion you get when you use the pano setting on your iPhone. You move your camera around. You're not taking a picture of a flat surface, of a flat scene, as if you had even a wide angle lens. A fisheye has the same effect, but that exercise in trying to stitch together frames from the film, I think, created a bit of that same kind of fisheye effect. So I'm a little bit dubious about putting too much certitude on that. And otherwise, we don't have any measurements of gait that were taken at the scene. We can only look at the kinematics of the track maker, really, and see. And it's kind of hard to generalize too much from Patty because of all of the potential quirks. If your assessment is correct, and I think it almost certainly is, very probably is, of this herniation of the quadriceps and this walleye gait that the way she walks, it almost appears that she has a bit of a pathologic gait. It isn't exactly normal. And so I would hate to generalize from her manner of walking too far.
Yeah, she could be an outlier.
Yeah.
We'd never know.
True.
So Jeff, do you have an elevator pitch? the party pitch. Like somebody says, well, explain to me, why you believe that Bigfoot's probably real. What do you tell people? You're a professor. Yeah. Your elevator pitch is gonna be way better than mine.
Well, no, and sometimes that makes it more challenging because you're trying to shoehorn more information into a small soundbite. It's always problematic. I basically, for me, the most defensible position too, and I think it's by far probably the most, if not one of the most, if not the most informative, is the data set of the footprints. I mean, I'm not braggadocious, but I have to say that I'm good at what I do, and I'm knowledgeable and have a keen eye for detail and keen observer, and that's come through and demonstrated through many interactions with other colleagues and other researchers, some with which I have agreed and have had concurrence, and others for which there's been some discord in interpretation. But there, and I'm not going down the path that Grover Krantz. I'm sure there will be people out there who make comparisons to Grover Krantz when he compared himself to Da Vinci, I think it was, and said that there were no other anatomists smarter than him. I'm not, and watch that clip. I got to know Grover a little bit, and I didn't have the opportunity to get to know him as well as I would have liked. But you watch that clip, and I through my brief interactions gained and those were not just minutes here and minutes there. I spent several days with him, going through his library, going through his collection of footprints and his collection of skulls and fossil casts and so forth, and help him put all that material in order before he expired, and gained an appreciation for a very dry wit that he had. And you watch that clip where he makes that statement, and you'll see the little corner of his mouth curl up like a little. It reminds me of the Grinch, the Grinch with that curly Q at the end of his smile. He was just jerking people's chains.
Just joking, yeah.
But having said that, so avoiding any accusation of being braggadocious, I'm not going to say that I can't be fooled, but boy, if I have been, then and have proven, and I can just see the coalition forces lining up to throw snares in my path now. But if I'm fooled, we might as well go home, because we won't be able to tell the difference between anything that's real or And so when I lay out this remarkably consistent and rational, functionally rational, evolutionarily rational model of the Sasquatch foot, which is clearly distinct from the human adaptation, and yet precisely what we would anticipate if we were to predict the foot morphology of a large bipedal pre-human hominoid. You've got it. And in some ways, some of the details are so subtle and so easily overlooked, but yet pop up. That's one elevator. I think the other one, the one that again blows me out of the water is viewing the Patterson-Gimlin film from with 50-50 hindsight. And the theme that I tried to emphasize for a couple of years following the anniversary of that film was the fact that with the advantage of 50-50 hindsight, we can really, if one will stop and look and educate themselves about the matter, will appreciate that the film anticipates in so many ways what we now understand about evolutionary adaptations of early hominins. But at the time of the film, those very propositions cut across the grain of conventional wisdom of in anthropology, at the time. Like my favorite one is that I've used over and over again, and so I'm sure some of your listeners will have heard it, but John Napier, who was a reasonably open-minded guy. I mean, he was a primatologist, very qualified primatologist, and a physician. He was a doctor, an MD, not just a PhD. There we go with the just again. Not a PhD, but also an MD. But anyway, he was on the panel at the Smithsonian that examined the Patterson-Gimlin film during its first scientific viewing here in the United States. And he was obviously impressed enough, even though he came out and kind of went along with the crowd and said thumbs down, gave a thumbs down. But he didn't really chime in on some of the ridiculous statements that were made at the time, which are embarrassing in hindsight. But he was obviously impressed enough that he undertook to write a book, the book he published, one of the first treatments of the subject, objective treatments of the subject by a serious scientist. And he maintained that pessimism about the Patterson-Gimlin film, but he acknowledged, he was willing to admit he really couldn't rationalize that reaction, except that when he looked at the subject of the film, he said, I see from the waist up something that's essentially an ape, and something from the waist down is essentially human in proportion. And he asserted he couldn't imagine such a hybrid of structure existing in nature, therefore it must be a contrivance. Well, it's interesting because that book came out in the early 70s, 72, I think it was, 75, 76, the public announcements and descriptions of the discovery of Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis, the first good examples of much more complete postcranial skeletons, associated postcranial skeletons that gave us the pelvis and the knee and the ankle and so forth. And how was it described in the popular press? Isn't this curious? From the waist up, she looks like a chimpanzee. But from the waist down, she looks like a human. That's what I was talking about earlier, these bipedal chimps, basically. Well, wait a minute. That was the linchpin. That was the one thing that Napier couldn't get past, was that apparent mosaic combination of features. Now, what if his book had been delayed in its publication and writing for another 5 or 6 years, and he was much more familiar with the Australopithecine discoveries? Would his conclusion about the Patterson-Gimlin film have been different? I mean, when you lay it out, it's just like when I had the opportunity. If you look at some of the pronouncements of other scientists who looked at the film, Walter Grieve was a biomechanist in England, and he said, there was some debate as to what the film speed was, but based on his expertise in examining motion, athletic motion, kinematics, and the filming, high-speed filming, and so forth, he said that if it were filmed at, and let's see if I get this straight, at 22 frames per second, which was what was expected, what was the standard for broadcast quality filming to get a nice, smooth 22 frames per second, he said those movements could, in his opinion, be imitated by a human actor, potentially in a suit, irregardless of his opinion. But see, this is based just on the kinematics. So setting aside any detailed evaluation of the prospect of a suit or not, keeping that in a separate bin, but just looking at the kinematics, he thought a human could replicate those moments of inertia, the arm swing, and so forth, this and that. But he said if it were shot, as had been suggested, at 16 or 18 frames per second, he said, in his opinion, it would be impossible for a human to mimic that walk. Well, we've clearly established that it was shot at 16 frames per second. 16 to 8, or in that range at least. And there's variance. Dr. Krantz, I think, very convincingly and through experimentation, and Bill Munns has done the same, demonstrated that you take 5 cameras of that model off the shelf crank them up, and carefully measure the frame rate, especially during the uncoiling of the spring, you get some variation. There's an acceptable variation standard for the specifications of that camera. Anyway, so the point being, 16, 18, it's not a big deal in that range versus 22 frames per second. I was contacted by a student of Walter Greaves, and he had an interest in this topic and had followed some of my work and some of my presentations. So, and I asked him, I said, well, is Dr. Greaves still alive? He says, oh yes, he's retired, but he's alive. I said, would he be open to a conversation about this? And he said, oh yeah, he'd probably be tickled. So I got in touch with him and I posed this simple question. I said, I explained to him and showed him the evidence, and I said, it had been now conclusively demonstrated that the film speed was 16 frames per second. Based on what you said back in 1967, 68, what would you conclude? And he took some time. He didn't just repeat or give an opinion off the cuff. He took some time to contemplate, review his notes, came back to me and he said, I stand by my statement.
Yeah.
So it's like these things that were that couldn't have been known, that couldn't have been incorporated. I mean, certainly not by Roger Patterson. And even if he had somebody in the wings that was coaching him, that was giving him tips, this was not the information that a conventional anthropologist would have provided to make a convincing hoax at the time.
Well, that's the thing, and there's so many people that have tried to, over the years, recreate the famous walk. No one's been able to. I mean, they've tried and tried and tried. As far as I'm concerned, and I'm aware, the footage holds up. Nobody knows. I mean, this is the legitimate article, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. And, when people see that, and when people have an opportunity to see the film in a much better rendering, this was one of the reasons that Bill Munns and I and this new player on the scene, Isaac Tian, who's a doctoral student. He's just about to finish up his doctoral thesis in computer vision and other aspects of computer science, computer technology, information technology, and so forth. People don't realize they have, it's been drummed into them. It's like so much in politics today. If you say it often enough, then some people come to accept it as true. So if you say that the film is blurry and indistinguishable, has no scientific value, you say that over and over and over again, then people start to believe you. And then when you show them this remarkable rendition of the film, that's probably the closest approximation to the original that we could ask for at this point, it blows their socks off. They can't believe it. Because
the re-rendering only showed more to it, more facts that could not be disputed, and more movement of muscles, and more things that just, especially we're talking 1960s technology, could never ever be hoaxed.
Yeah, and the higher grade stabilization, and combined with the superimposition of the multiple frames, but that stabilization, it's so seamless. Your eye can focus on details that were otherwise difficult to observe because of the distraction of the gyration and the streaks and spots and blemishes and so forth in the various copies, that especially the broadcast copy that's so often now licensed from the Pattersons, from Mrs. Patterson. I mean, and the network's kind of like that, because it gives that air of mystery and campiness feel to it. It's I honestly hate this. I was watching a movie it was the Bourne trilogy, and they use that camera technique where they cannot hold the camera still in one place, as if that's somehow supposed to be there were several television dramas that that adopted that, and it just drove me nuts because it's very distracting to me. And so when you see it just seamlessly walk across that perfectly stable background, your eye focuses on the shortening of the rectus femoris and the differentiation of the lateral and long heads of the triceps and the outline of the deltoid and the tendon of the biceps femoris. I mean, you can see detail after detail after detail that are missed otherwise, and it's mesmerizing. You know,
do you think the new enhancement will convince more scientists?
Well, I hope so. You know, I was going to say, I one of the accomplishments that I'm proud of is I managed to get an abstract passed review to do a poster presentation about some of the aspects of the mid and implications of the mid-tarsal break, especially as exemplified in the track record of the Patterson-Gimlin film. So not only did I have a poster presentation set up on my panel there, my easel, board. If you've ever been to the professional meetings like this, you go into a big auditorium and there's all these, like a portable chalkboard sized bulletin board material, foam board that and you have this large format printed poster that goes up that summarizes your research. It has an introduction and methods and materials and data and results and interpretation, et cetera, and so on. And so I focused on this interpretation of the significance of the flat, flexible foot adaptation of the Sasquatch foot. To augment the experience, I got special permission, which had never been done before, to have a video monitor and a tape player. And Doug, I don't know if you remember, but you contributed to this. Doug provided some segments for this tape where we had the film running in slow motion, we had close-ups, we had some reverse image, some negative image, and a whole bunch of different ways to view the film. And this was put on this tape and then just played on a big long loop. And that ran for the full 4.5 hours that the poster was up. And they also let me bring in a little folding table upon which I displayed replicas of a selection of casts from the Patterson-Gimlin film site. And because there's just something about hefting a cast that's so different than seeing an image in a book or even on a slide presentation. And so here are all these anthropologists and who had never had the opportunity to see the film in this way before. And there were examples where they would just, like I said, they'd get mesmerized. They'd sit there and watch it and watch it and watch it. They'd come over and they were just amazed at looking at the details of these footprints and to consider the interpretation that I was proposing and the significance of that. And multiple people would say to me, my gosh, I've never seen it portrayed like this before. And so I'm hoping that this this presentation on the History Channel and I'm going to very likely, although I've used the theme extensively to try to get the word out, I hate to be redundant for those who think it's right.
Yeah, and that show was The Proof is Out There.
The Proof is Out There on the History Channel.
Yep, and it's got the new enhancements in the thing, although there's still more of the film to enhance, correct?
Oh, exactly. I mean, Isaac did just usually the typical
money shot
segment that you see, but the bookends, which are really interesting and are rarely shown on television,
right,
are very insightful. Those first images, which are highly gyrated, as Roger went initially running across the creek, so the camera was bouncing all over the place. But even there, intermingled are a few very clear frames.
They're actually clearer than any of them.
Yeah, and it's only about 40 feet away from Roger at that point.
Like that calf, there's one part where it shows the calf muscle.
Yeah,
is so amazing.
Whoa! There's the one where the foot comes up and you're so close, you can actually see the individual toe pads. You can see the contours.
Yeah,
you can see the flexion crease across the ball of the foot. It's just and boy, those big long arms there. It has that more stooped forward look. Yeah. It's before it really started taking off. I think, it's been suggested that initially it really didn't see these guys as much of a threat, and it's walking off at a pretty leisurely pace. But then when it turns, about the time it turns back, it's really striding out there. It's really, it's really motoring, and it's standing much more upright, holding its head much more upright and alert. Well, not more alert necessarily, but more attentive, I think, to the surroundings of what these two yokels are doing on my side of the creek.
Do you ever think that there is any way to get more scientists on board just based on the joint ratios? Because they're so different than a human. You've got the longer torso, you've got the longer forearm.
I know. Short. The intermembral index is outside of human variation.
Yeah.
And the dimensions, the shoulder breadths and hip breadths, are there are no humans. I mean, Grover Krantz was dead on when he said there's no human alive that can approximate those proportions.
But why doesn't that alone that these creatures are real?
Because they can't be there, therefore they aren't.
Jesus.
That's what was said to me. I mean, that was the rationale. When we had Richard Greenwell and I had received a solicitation for to write a paper, sort of laying out the state of knowledge, the state of the science of Sasquatch for the California Academy of Sciences publication. And upon completion and submission, it was rejected by their scientific board. And when I pressed the editor for a justification for that, what came back was the statement, literally, the statement he said, she's this one individual, one anthropologist, and she said, they can't exist, therefore they don't exist, and it doesn't matter what evidence they think they have.
It's so wrong.
Yeah, I mean, how do you push back on that? I mean, how do you overcome that? You can't. That kind of prejudice. I said to the editor, well, you're the editor. And he said, I know, but if I went against my scientific advisory board's recommendation, I wouldn't be the editor for very long. And so it got the kibosh. But see, that's a whole, where does that come from? That mentality. It comes from the thinking that surrounds the single species hypothesis. When Ivan Sanderson published his encyclopedic book, Abominable Snowman, Legend Come to Life, the story of subhuman hominoids on 5 continents. Well, in 1962, that was the heyday of the single species of hypothesis, which, stated that, or advocated that we were the only hominid on the planet. There could be no others. This is where her statement, they can't exist. I've got, in one of my presentations, I have a quote from Dr. Biegert, who was at that time the director of the Swiss Anthropological Institute in Zurich, a very prominent institution. And basically, his statement was in response to allegations surrounding the Minnesota Iceman. Whether you are an enthusiast about the Iceman or not, the philosophical point was he pointed out there is no possibility of relic Neanderthals on the planet today. Today there is one species of hominin, and that is, or hominid was the term at that time, of hominid, and that's Homo sapiens, period. So, that's the problem. Now, like I said, that paradigm has been thrown out the window in the face of overwhelming evidence of a remarkably bushy and complicated evolutionary tree, which not only is very bushy, but now has recognized branches that have persisted until remarkably recent times. So we've got the Hobbit, 50,000 years, if not later. We've got Homo heidelbergensis, at least that's what the title is for now, in East Asia, that are as young as 20,000 years. We've got some sites of Neanderthals that suggest possibly as young as 10 to 20,000 years. We've got Homo erectus in Java as recently as 25, some debate, 25 to 75,000 years, and so on and so on and so on. The examples just keep marshaling that suggest that, why would we, how can we rationalize an assumption that we are the only ones when there's so much indication that until very recently in the fossil record, we have evidence of other contemporaneous hominins, and in the face of so much anecdotal and other trace and physical evidence, suggestive trace and physical evidence of other relic hominoids, like the Yeti, like the Almas, like the Orang Pendek, like the Sasquatch or Yer, or whatever regional term you want to apply. I mean, the context is there. And that's been one of my, one of the things the drums I've been beating here of late, is to establish that and at least get the acknowledgement. You can't say that it's impossible. It's absolutely possible. It's absolutely possible and rational, and there's no reason to exclude it. The question then is, how probable is it? How likely is it that these creatures have existed under our noses and have escaped official acknowledgement? And you can argue that until you're blue in the face, but that doesn't eliminate the evidence. I've had this conversation with a number of skeptics. I point out it's so interesting how you always gravitate to your favorite piece of missing evidence. Why haven't you found a bone? Why don't you have DNA? But yet you're incapable of or unwilling to engage the evidence we have in hand. I said, this one individual, he was actually a forensic anthropologist, and so his mindset, his context is physical trace, the archaeological record of human activities and so forth. And he said, his question was about the bones. Where's the physical trace? And I pointed this out as this observation about their favorite negative piece or missing piece of evidence. I said, what about all the other evidence? And he goes, oh, but what evidence are you talking about? I said, you were in my presentation, right? And I said, well, let's just, I'll give you, I won't prejudge you on that basis, but let's just, the evidence of footprints, the thing that I'm most preoccupied with. His response was, I'm not an expert in footprints. And I said, well, as a matter of fact, it just so happens that I am. So don't you think I deserve the same deference that I would give you if it were a matter of a question of forensic anthropology? And that changed the tone. He was a little more open-minded to discuss the evidence in hand. But how do you just throw that out?
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, Jeff, how many unicorn reports have you ever gotten? None, because there are no unicorns.
Right.
But we get these constantly fueled reports, consistent eyewitnesses, over and over and over every day.
Sure.
And I love it when people go, well, how come nobody ever sees them? It's like,
right. Yeah.
Wait, do you want to read through 6,000 reports that are pretty detailed?
Right.
They're seen, but the thing is that alone is, to me, from a non-scientific standpoint, that kind of anecdotal evidence is pretty amazing. That it's just fuel, because there's no fueling on unicorns.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I was doing a radio interview one time, and it was sort of a setup, and the there was a caller who came on, and I'm pretty sure it was prearranged, but maybe not. But he drew attention to the work of Elizabeth Loftus, who's famous for her research on memory, and especially, garnered some publicity in litigations where she was the expert testimony regarding suspect identifications by witnesses and also regressed memories, like repressed recollections of abuse or so forth in childhood. But anyway, his point was, are you familiar with her work? And I said, well, yes. And I said, I'm not sure of the application here. And he says, well, it's everything. You cannot rely on eyewitness testimony. It doesn't matter how many eyewitness testimonies you have. You have to consider them singly, and considered singly, they're not reliable. And he just went on and on and on. And I took, umbrage with that and offered rebuts and so forth. And the conversation circled around, and he was, the moderator just let it go on and on far longer than it was justified. Finally, he was getting frustrated with me, and he said, the caller said, if there was an 800-pound gorilla out there, people would be seeing it. And I just paused and I laughed and I said, this is where the conversation started. People are seeing it, but you're dismissing it offhandedly because of some preconception that all eyewitness testimony is unreliable. Now, a paper was recently published, and I wrote a comment on it, a review of it. It wasn't published in the Relic Hominoid Inquiry, but in the Journal of Scientific Exploration, which is, if you're not familiar with the Society for Scientific Investigation or Scientific Exploration, excuse me, it's a bona fide academic society. They specialize, they provide, much like the Relic Hominoid Inquiry does, a much broader platform for a lot of emphasis on parapsychology and phenomenon related to that, but they delve into other things that might be considered paranormal, and they occasionally deal with the issues of cryptozoology. But this paper was published, and it was actually a former colleague of Richard Greenwell's at the University of Arizona, who took the data set that the two of them had been working on, a long dormant manuscript, and revived it and brought it up to date through their literature review. That I found particularly interesting, because just in the past 10, 15 years, there has been a rather prolifically publishing researcher who has taken a very diametrically opposite position to Elizabeth Loftus, and has argued and demonstrated through experiment that actually human observers are remarkably reliable under certain conditions. And, the things that she was focused upon were more prone to reconstruction and elaboration. I mean, she makes the point that memory is soft, it's malleable. Every time you retell a story, every time I retell a story, not only does the story get altered and or embellished or whatever, but we remember it a little bit different, and that becomes our new reality. And so, yes, there is that pitfall. There are those problems. And that's why I've always, kind of held anecdotal evidence to a higher standard, that I'm looking for corroborative trace or physical evidence to go with the experience. But in this paper, he cites these articles that really do show that that eyewitness testimony is valuable, and that many of these observations are reliable, especially as I've often said, it's one thing when you have an elderly person. I better be gender neutral here. An elderly person who was mugged, and they're trying to pick out the suspect from a lineup of individuals. That's very different than asking an experienced outdoorsman, say a hunter or a game warden or whatever, and here's his lineup of the things that he might have seen, and there's a wolf, and a deer and an elk and a bear and a moose and a Bigfoot and a backpacker. You know, I mean, it's apples and oranges. We're not talking about the same thing. This is what I tried to convey to this caller earlier on.
Well, not only are the sightings constantly coming in, but they happen in very specific geographic areas.
Yes, that's a very important point, and I try to stress that too. There is an ecological basis. I get so annoyed when the cable documentaries repeat the allegation that Bigfoot is reported in every state of the union. Okay, it may be reported. That doesn't, because not all eyewitness testimony is reliable, but that doesn't mean it exists in every state of the union. You know, and so I've also pushed this theme heavily too. There's this remarkable ecological correlation, and there's now a published paper. Actually, it's an editorial, a guest editorial in what is it, in Biogeography Today publication by some GIS technicians, one of which is an acquaintance of mine who has done some collaborative work and has published a couple of papers in the Relic Hominoid Inquiry. But they were actually testing ecological software, modeling software, and to demonstrate their concern that researchers were blindly relying on these packages without understanding the algorithms contained therein, you know, so they knew how the data was being treated. They proposed to test some ostensibly bogus data. Namely, they plugged in data sets of Bigfoot reports. And but what came out was this remarkably rational, coherent model of Bigfoot ecology that had a remarkable overlap, congruence with habitat parameters for black bear, another large omnivore. No surprise, huh?
Yeah.
Of course, they adopted a sort of tongue-in-cheek posture about it because in order to get the paper published, but I have it on good authority that it was indeed tongue-in-cheek, and that all three are very interested in the subject. Even, you know, one in particular, who's I just went blank on his name, but it'll pop back. But he said that his two co-authors were rather skeptical at the outset, but after seeing the results, they were quite intrigued. And he said that he had them reading my book. So,
so
yes.
Jeff, we only have like 5 minutes left.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the hope it gives when we're members, because we're both members of a Project Zoo book.
Right.
There's numerous scientists that are out there studying this topic.
Right.
But they're anonymous still.
Yes, many of them are. Yes.
But it's hopeful.
Oh, of course it is. It is. I mean, like I was saying before, there are repeated experiences of new young academics who are very interested. The new hires in our department have a much less antagonistic, if at all. I've not experienced any antagonism. You know, I discovered at our last department retreat that I was the second or third oldest in our department now. 3/4 of our department has been in the department less than 5 years. And so there's a very different attitude. And I you know, the public popularity is there. And I think it will only grow through more exposure to quality publications. I mean, I'm a little bit concerned about the plethora of self-published books that have a very low bar for standards of craftsmanship, wordsmithing, and otherwise thought.
And fact checking and you know what I mean, you know, because a lot of them, you know, they're just put together and I hear you.
And the proliferation of paranormal.
And there really hasn't been a scientific book since Legend Means Science, has there?
Not I think Bindernagel's second book came out afterward. His is a good one. God, I'd have to sit and look at I don't want to say
There hasn't been much.
There hasn't been much. No, a lot of the stuff is disappointing. There's some. I really like the regional treatments where an individual carefully and thoughtfully records and critically documents anecdotes in their particular region that they have the opportunity and familiarity to investigate and evaluate. Those are helpful. Yeah. I really enjoy those. But when someone writes a book and basically they end up rehashing all the classic stories and citing all the people, or string together a bunch of interviews, get everyone else's opinion, it's you should write about what you know, what you've experienced, make a contribution to something firsthand rather than two or three.
Instead of rehashing what others have said. Yeah.
Totally
understand. We have, wow, is time ever flowing? Whoa, did that go? Talk about it. Interesting talk. Let me tell you. A lot of fun listening to Jeff. Dr. Meldrum, how can people look at your stuff? You got websites or anything like that out there that you'd like to direct our listeners to?
Well, obviously, if you haven't read Sasquatch Legend Meets Science, and based on sales, which I'm interested in as a barometer of interest, there's that's another sign that there's another generation of enthusiasts, because Sasquatch Legends Meets Science sales peaked and then ebbed, and now they're taking off again.
Good.
It used to be when I would go to a conference, if one case of books, 22 books was plenty, and now I routinely run out if I don't have at least 2 boxes, and so that's good. I like to see that. So anyway, read my books, read the field guide, and so forth. But then I would direct the viewers to the Relic Hominoid Inquiry is a great place.
Okay.
If you Google RHI or Relic Hominoid Inquiry, that's relic with a T, which is the proper usage in the biological sciences. You'll find it by Googling. And we're in our 10th year now. It's hard to believe, but our 10th year, and there are dozens of submissions, including primary research papers, essays, in-depth essay book reviews that are very insightful, news items, commentary, so forth.
All sorts of good stuff.
Yeah.
Check that out, guys. We got to get out of here, Doug. Can you believe it's already come and gone, another show?
Yep. Zing.
Gosh, just quick. Till next time, guys, take care of each other, love each other. Check out Dr. Jeff Meldrum stuff. Get the book, Sasquatch Legend Meets Science. Oh my gosh. I almost had a sneeze there. You ever get one of those caught and you're like, oh my God. Anyhow, I digress. We got to get out of here. Talk to you guys later. Bye.